We live in interesting times.
For the headlines.
Jailed Australian Cardinal George Pell asks appeals court judges to quash his landmark convictions for molesting 2 choir boys in a cathedral more than 20 years ago.
Australia's federal police raided the offices of the National Public Broadcaster on Wednesday in connection to a 2017 story based on leaked military documents that indicated the country's military forces were being investigated for possible war crimes in Afghanistan.
And world leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, gathered on the south coast of England to mark the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings. But the stars of the show were the elderly veterans of that campaign. I'm Alma Angeles, wherever you're watching from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.
We welcome our viewers here in the Philippines and around the world. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sam Cepeda.
And now to the news. First off to Sudan, the military council said the ruling generals are ready to resume negotiations with the opposition after 3 days of a violent crackdown on pro-democracy protesters that left 60 people dead across the country. Take a look. The head of the council, General Abdel Fattah Burhan, said there would be no restrictions in talks with the leaders behind the months-long street protests. There was no immediate reaction from the protest movement. The motives for Burhan's about-face, if sincere, were not immediately clear. Burhan had earlier cut the negotiations and canceled all agreed-on points between the military and the Forces for Declaration of Freedom and Change, an alliance which represents the protesters. Meanwhile, the death toll in the military's violent crackdown on protesters reached 60 on Wednesday. According to media reports, gunfire erupted today in the streets of the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. Security forces opened fire on protesters outside the country's military headquarters and killed several people. In April, the movement succeeded in forcing the military to remove Sudan's longtime strongman, Omar al-Bashir. It then kept its sit-in going, demanding that the generals who took power hand over authority to the civilians.
Secretary General Antonio Guterres strongly condemns the violence and reports of the excessive use of force by security personnel on civilians that have resulted in the deaths and injury of many in Sudan. Reading a statement, the UN spokesperson Stéphane Dujarric said that the Guterres condemned the use of force to disperse the protesters at the sit-in site.
The Secretary General strongly condemns the violence and reports of the excessive force used by security personnel on civilians that have resulted in the deaths and injury of many. He condemns the use of force to disperse the protesters at the sit-in site, and he is alarmed by reports that security forces have opened fire inside medical facilities. The Secretary General reminds the Transitional Military Council of its responsibility for the safety and security of the citizens of Sudan. He urges all parties to act with the utmost restraint. The Secretary General urges the Sudanese authorities to facilitate an independent investigation into the deaths and to hold those responsible accountable.
According to media reports, gunfire erupted today in the streets of the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. Security forces opened fire on protesters outside the country's military headquarters and killed several people.
Jailed Australian Cardinal George Pell asked the appeals court judges to quash his landmark conviction for child sex abuse. He branded the charges against him as bizarre and impossible. He was convicted of molesting 2 choir boys in a cathedral more than 20 years ago. A jury unanimously convicted Pell in December of orally raping a 13-year-old choir boy and indecently dealing with a boy and the boy's 13-year-old friend in Melbourne Street or St. Patrick's Cathedral in the late 1990s. Pell had become Archbishop of Melbourne, Australia's second largest city, only months before. Pell's second victim died of a drug overdose in 2014 and never disclosed the abuse. He has been in a Melbourne prison since he was sentenced in March to 6 years in prison.
In my view, the first episode in the priest sacristy involved a brazen and forcible sexual attack upon the two victims. I am conscious that the term of imprisonment, which I am about to impose upon you, carries with it a real, as distinct from theoretical, possibility that you may not live to be released from prison.
You've planted yourself, and this is all what's been alleged, okay, instead of saying alleged straight off, this is all the story. Planted yourself in a spot between these two boys and the doorway, in the sacristy room?
After Sunday Mass?
Yes. Yes. And, in effect, prevented them from leaving the room. Now, the boys knew they were in a fair bit of trouble, and that at that time you've moved your robes to one side and exposed your
Stop it.
You're still at this stage standing with your back to the door.
What a load of absolute and disgraceful rubbish. Completely false. Madness.
In court documents, Pell's lawyers claimed a catalog of at least 13 solid obstacles in the path of a conviction. Outside court, meanwhile, victims of church sex abuse were distressed by the specter of Pell being acquitted on appeal.
The day that I stopped going to church was the greatest uplift I've had for 25 years, to be free of it all. So here I am today, but the victims will never get a good hearing, I'm afraid. It'll just be another fizzy drink. It'll be the judges and the barristers will play with words, and they haven't taken any notice of the jury. So here we go again. We're just being treated like a pack of fools.
I'm just tired of it. Like, he's getting all these say, and our victims are the ones who passed away. You know, it's just a joke to the system. It is.
You know, due process has occurred, and, Pell won't accept the decision of the umpire. There's no peace, there's no rest until this is finally resolved.
Australia's federal police say they have executed a search warrant on the Australian Broadcasting Corporation Sydney offices in relation to allegations of publishing classified material. According to the AUDC, the search is in relation to a series of 2017 stories known as the Afghan Files by the broadcaster's investigative journalists, which revealed allegations of misconduct by Australian Special Forces in Afghanistan. The raid in a suburb of Sydney came a day after federal police searched the Canberra home of Anika Smethurst, the political editor of the Sunday Telegraph of Sydney, over a 2018 story detailing an alleged government proposal to spy on Australians. There were no arrests in either raid. Australian law forbids officials from disclosing secret information, and the police warrants in both raids were based on a law enacted in 1914. The police said in a statement that the two raids were not linked. Anderson said ABC stood by its journalists, would protect its sources and continue to report without fear or favor on national security and intelligence issues.
Well, as far as I'm aware, they're going through the building. They're looking at various things that the warrant entitles them to look at. We have lawyers and my colleague John Lyons following them around. But let me just say the Managing Director's put a statement out on this. It's a very unwelcome and serious development. I think for people maybe who aren't in the media business, sometimes talking about press freedom can sound a bit like a cliche. It is extremely unusual for an authority to exercise a warrant on a national public broadcaster like this, and it is very serious. But we will be doing everything we can to limit the scope of this, and we will do everything we can to stand by our reporters. And as a general observation, we always do whatever we can to stand by our sources, of course.
In other news, U.S. President Donald Trump has worked to clean up a diplomatic spat, telling Good Morning Britain he meant no royal insult when he used the term nasty in discussing the American-born Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. Take a listen.
This Meghan Markle business.
Yeah.
Do you think Meghan Markle's nasty or not?
No, you know, the question was asked to me, and I didn't know that she said anything bad about me. It sounds like she did, and that's okay. I mean, hey, join the crowd, right? You've heard about that too with yourself.
Of
I know that, right? But it seems like she had, and they said some of the things that she said, and it's actually on tape. And I said, wow, I didn't know she was nasty. I wasn't referring to her, she's nasty. I said she was nasty about me. And essentially, I didn't know she was nasty about me. So I said, but you know what? She's doing a good job. I hope she enjoys her life.
The phrase generated a lot of media coverage, and Trump has worked diligently to explain that he was speaking specifically on her comments about him and not about her.
During the interview, the Good Morning Britain host also asked the U.S. president if he believed in climate change, to which Trump replied saying it was now referred to as extreme weather. Earlier, during his visit to the United Kingdom, Trump spoke with Britain's Prince Charles about the impact of climate change.
About climate change.
What he really wants and what he really feels warmly about is the future. He wants to make sure future generations have climate that is good climate as opposed to a disaster. And I agree.
But do you personally believe in climate change?
I believe that there's a change in weather, and I think it changes both ways. Don't forget, it used to be called global warming. That wasn't working. Then it was called climate change. Now it's actually called extreme weather. Because with extreme weather, you can't miss. Look, we have a thing now in tornadoes. I don't remember tornadoes in the U.S. to the extent. But then when you look back, 40 years ago, we had the worst tornado binge that we've ever had. In the 1890s, we had our worst hurricanes, and I would say we've had some very bad hurricanes.
Were you able to give Prince Charles any comfort that you, as the United States president, are taking this seriously?
I think I was, yeah. I think we had a great conversation, and it was about, as you would call it, climate change.
Meanwhile, world leaders, including U.S. President Trump, gathered on the south coast of England to mark the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings. Take a look. But the stars of the show were the elderly veterans of that campaign who said they were surprised by all the attention. They were just doing their jobs. The event, which kicks off 2 days of D-Day anniversary observances, is intended as a tribute to the troops who shaped history during the dangerous mission to reach beachheads and fight in German-occupied France. D-Day saw more than 150,000 Allied troops land on the beaches of Normandy in northwest France on June 6 of 1944, carried by 7,000 boats. The Battle of Normandy, codenamed Operation Overlord, was a turning point in the war and helped bring about Nazi Germany's defeat in May 1945. Now, one of those veterans is former Royal Marine Leigh Budding. Suddenly, it's D-Day again for him. The soft-spoken Budding is once again an 18-year-old gunner in 45 Commando who smiles from a wartime photograph in a dress uniform that looks like he borrowed it from his father. Take a look.
And alongside of us, of course, was the battleships pounding away at their bigger targets, more inland, and So the noise was deafening, and the black smoke and the acrid smell of cordite, which was coming from the battleships firing the big shell. They're the outstanding things in my memory of that day. I cast my mind back to that 75 years ago, and you know, I just can't believe what happened, and that we're still here after all those years afterwards. Yeah.
U.S. President Donald Trump has helped kick off 2 days of D-Day observances by reading excerpts of a prayer that President Franklin Roosevelt read to the nation on June 6, 1944. The timing of the Normandy invasion during World War II had been a top secret. Roosevelt made no mention of it during a national radio broadcast the day before, and he used the prayer to help explain his silence.
Need thy blessings, for the enemy is strong. Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization, and to set free a suffering humanity. They will need thy blessings, for the enemy is strong. He may hurl back our forces, but we shall return again and again. And we know that by thy grace and by the righteous of our cause, our sons will triumph. Some will never return. Embrace these, Father, and receive them, the heroic servants, into thy kingdom. And, O Lord, give us faith. Give us faith in thee, faith in our sons, faith in each other, and faith in our united crusade. Thy will be done, Almighty God. Amen.
Meanwhile, Britain's Queen Elizabeth II has paid tribute to soldiers' valor during the service of commemoration in southern England to mark the 75th anniversary of D-Day. The Queen and other leaders of the wartime allies joined some 300 World War II veterans at the seaside ceremony in Portsmouth. And take a listen.
We need a revival of spirit, a new unconquerable resolve. That is exactly what those brave men brought to the battle, as the fate of the world depended on their success. Many of them would never return, and the heroism, courage, and sacrifice of those who lost their lives will never be forgotten. It is with humility and pleasure, on behalf of the entire country, indeed the whole free world, that I say to you all, thank you.
Troops began to embark from Portsmouth on June 5, 1944, landing in Normandy the next morning.
As a veteran of the 607th Graves Registration Company, George Ciampa had the grim task of collecting, documenting, and burying the dead from World War II. He still sees each grave as the symbol of a personal sacrifice for freedom. Now he's keen to ensure these young trainee officers learn about the past before they fight wars of the future. When he arrived in Normandy, Ciampa was still 18, and he remembers himself as a skinny young man who couldn't swim, arriving at Utah Beach, one of the landing areas for almost a year that followed. Ciampa's company handled about 75,000 bodies.
But by every standard of human endeavor, a superb achievement and an outstanding success.
My job was in Graves registration. That's a euphemism for the gathering of dead soldiers, American and German, and seeing that they're buried properly in a temporary grave, in a temporary cemetery. When I say temporary grave, they're 6 feet deep, and they're temporary cemeteries until the permanent ones were built 2 years after the war, and all of those were just interred by local citizens that were paid to do that work and put the remains in lined caskets that were either put in permanent cemeteries there or sent home to the next of kin when requested. It did break down one day, and the lieutenant pulled out his .45 and pointed at me and said, "You get your ass out there and suck it up." And that's the way it was treated, so I did. And so I worked like a robot around bodies. You try to keep from really getting involved with what you're looking at. Some of us handle it tougher than others. You had the stench in Normandy that got in your clothing. You slept in that clothing. No, I had no idea how grotesque it was going to be. So, you know, I didn't talk about it.
A small beginning, perhaps.
On D-Day alone, there were 2,499 American fatalities, according to the U.S. National D-Day Memorial Foundation. There were some 10,000 Allied casualties with 4,414 deaths and an estimated 4,000 or 49,000 casualties on the German side. At its peak, there were over 17,000 American soldiers in the temporary cemetery before 60% of them were returned home in 1947, 2 years after the war ended. Some existing cemeteries, like the Henry Chapelle American Cemetery in Belgium, were built next to temporary ones, and the bodies were moved over.
I want to let these kids know that there's a very high price for freedom. I've been asked, do I dream about it? No, I don't. But what I do is I wake up in the middle of the night. Sometimes I have thoughts about those things, but I don't dwell on them. If I did, I'd be a basket case. You know, I'd be PTSD. United you stand, divided you fall, and that's happened to other civilizations. And so I think how terrible it is here. I think about all these guys that were killed, especially the guys who were 18, 19, and 20, who never had a girlfriend, wife, children, like I have had, live a life like I've lived, even though my life wasn't easy. I went through the Depression, and I remember what it's like to wear shoes with cardboard in there because you got holes in the soles. But we were happy.
According to the National World War II Museum, 16 million Americans served in the war. Figures from 2018 show that 496,777 veterans remain, including 93-year-old George Ciampa.
And on the eve of the 75th anniversary of the D-Day landings, paratroopers, including 97-year-old American D-Day veteran Tom Rice, leaped out of the aircraft over the Normandy countryside in tribute to the soldiers who participated in the Allied landings in Normandy on June 6, 1944. Take a look.
How was it? How do you feel? I feel great. Go back up and do it again.
INC, or Iglesia Ni Cristo, organizes Aid for Humanity to OFWs in Japan. Christine Mendoza reports.
Overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs, in Japan are thankful to the Iglesia Ni Cristo for the tangible and intangible blessings they have received during the Aid for OFW and Aid for Humanity event the church has organized in Odaiba, Tokyo last Sunday.
The place has been filled up with many visitors coming from various locations in the northwestern part of Japan to participate in the Aid for Humanity of the Iglesia Ni Cristo.
Some guests said the event has cheered them up and comforted them from the homesickness they have felt living away from their family and friends. One of them is even feeling emotional as she thanked the church for inviting her to an event where she got to mingle with so many Filipinos, curing the loneliness she felt.
Salamat po sa pag-invite po sa amin. Blessed po kami na nakarating po dito. So, thankful and blessed na. And at the same time, lalo na po sa event at sa Word with God, na feel or na ano yung emptiness na homesick po. Kasi bago pa po kami dito sa Japan. So, nangyayari po parang homesick yung daanan namin. So, nakakawala po siya ng homesick talaga. And aside po doon, nakakita po kami ng maraming Pinoy. So, parang ganda po ng Pinoy.
Hello po, thank you for the invitation. Actually, it's my first time to join such an event. 3 weeks pa kasi ako dito sa Japan. And I'm so happy to see many Filipinos gathering. Sobrang blessed po ako.
In the event, the Philippine-grown church has distributed food, drinks, and giveaways to all their invited guests, regardless of their nationalities. Some of those who have received the goods express their gratitude as the items they got are just what they need.
Sobra po kami nagpapasalamat sa biyayang ito. So, very unexpectedly kasi yung nasa loob is mga super useful sa bahay. So, actually, lahat ng mga kulang ko sa bayan dito. Kaya sobrang happy. Super blessed. Maraming salamat po.
Yes po, salamat po sa biyaya na in-share po ninyo ng Iglesia ni Cristo.
At kahit po hindi po kami ka-anib ng Iglesia ni Cristo, so very blessed po kami, nabigyan po kami.
That's not all. There was also an entertainment where various Filipino celebrities shared their talents and performed for all the attendees. But aside from the tangible things they got, guests are also thankful for the intangible gifts they acquired, the words of God from the Bible or the inspiring words. During the worship service that was officiated by no other than the Iglesia ni Cristo's executive minister, Brother Eduardo V. Manalo, who traveled all the way from the Philippines to visit the church's members in Japan.
Reporting from Tokyo, Japan, this is Christine Mendoza for Eagle News International, and I'm 1 with 25.
And the news continues here on Eagle News International. We'll be right back.
For Business News, this is Cesar Vallejos. At least 18 million Filipinos are at risk of losing their jobs to automation over the next 20 years if the government fails to retool them for the fourth industrial revolution, according to the International Labour Organization. ILO Enterprise Development and Skills Technical Officer Jordi Prat-Tuca said 56% of workers in Southeast Asia would be displaced by the global shift to automation over the next 2 decades. Although there will be opportunities generated from the transition, there will be job losses too, he added at the Manila leg of Asia Society and JP Morgan's One Step Ahead series on Tuesday. Assessments by ILO showed roughly 18 million workers in the Philippines are at risk of losing their jobs to automation, according to Tuca. Thousands of workers will lose their jobs in this transition from the third industrial revolution to the fourth industrial revolution. Those workers may be the least equipped to take on new jobs created by the transition, Tuca explained. Job losses to automation will mostly be in the assembly lines and services sector, such as data clerks, customer service representatives, cashiers, and bank tellers. Tuca said one way to save them from eventual displacement is by providing them training on new skills that are in demand in the fourth industrial revolution. He also suggested that the government initiate programs that will prepare the youth for the jobs of the future. The ILO official said women are more at risk than men to lose their job in the transition to the fourth industrial revolution, as female laborers in Southeast Asia are mostly employed in traditional low-skilled work. Women in the science and technology sectors are employed predominantly in entry-level jobs with poor job quality. Traditional low-skilled jobs performed by women across economic sectors are declining in terms of demand and are shifting to more skilled opportunities to KASED. McKinsey & Company Philippines associate partner Boris Van said 60% of all jobs have at least 30% technical activities prone to automation. Predictable physical work such as welding, soldering in assembly lines, food preparation and packaging objects will most probably be taken over by technological advancements over the next years. Unpredictable physical work, including construction, forestry, and raising farm animals, are the safest from automation. Locators continue to come in or expand their existing operations in the Clark Freeport zone in Pampanga despite anxiety over the Trabajo bill and the fall of investment pledges in the country's economic zones. Rodem R. Perez, Clark Development Corporate's Assistant Vice President for Business Development, said Hong Kong's La Rose Noire will be expanding its facility in the former American base, while one of the world's largest cheese makers, the identity of which is still being withheld, will be setting up a facility inside Clark. La Rose Noire will be sourcing their cacao in Davao for their needs. They are now in talks with Malagos Chocolate as a supplier, he said, referring to the iconic chocolate maker that has boosted Davao's brand as a food maker. The Trabajo bill is the second phase of the Duterte administration's tax reform package that mainly deals with corporate taxation. Its other main feature, the rationalization of tax incentives, is what worries Ecozone locators. Although its passage by the 17th Congress was derailed as a result of reservations among senators, business groups worry that an administration-dominated 18th Congress may yet fast-track its passage. From only 6 locators when the Freeport started out in 1994, Clark now has more than 1,000 locators. Aside from factories, Clark is also targeting the MICE market, or the meetings, incentives, conferences, and exhibitions, as the Clark International Airport will have a major upgrade with its new terminal. About 2 billion pesos in investments are being poured into theme parks inside Clark Field, including the Aqua Planet theme park and the Clark Safari Park. Clark is playing host to some of the games of the upcoming 30th Southeast Asian Games, which the Philippines is hosting. A 13 billion peso funding from the private sector is being poured into the new Clark City Government Administrative Center to construct a small sports complex that includes a 20,000-seater track and field stadium, a 2,000-seater aquatics center, and an athletes' village. Meeting the Sustainable Development Goals will require the help of the country's partners, including international institutions, according to the National Economic and Development Authority, or NEDA. Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Ernesto Pernia said this is particularly the case for SDGs Goal number 4 on quality education, Goal number 8, decent work and economic growth, and Goal number 10, reduced inequalities. The massive resource requirements to meet the ambitious agenda of the SDGs require inclusion and engagement of all stakeholders, and we acknowledge that meeting our development commitments requires nothing short of a whole-of-society approach and determination, Pernia said in a statement before the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific. Partnerships are vital and fundamental to achieving the SDGs and our national development goals, he added. Pernia said government efforts such as the Conditional Cash Transfer Program required a partnership between the private and non-government organizations to provide alternative modes of education through the alternative learning system to beneficiaries. He also cited the recently passed Expanded Maternity Leave Act that increases maternity leave benefits from 60 to 105 days. We are counting on private companies to implement non-discrimination laws such as this and to ensure that women receive equal opportunities in the workplace, Pernia said. The NEDA chief said several businesses are actively creating opportunities for the poor and marginalized to participate in the production value chain. He highlighted the National Spatial Strategy, which was designed during the start of the administration to tackle spatial and socioeconomic inequalities by linking lagging regions with leading ones. Transport infrastructure will create more opportunities for production, employment, and livelihood in regions outside of urban centers like Metro Manila. Improving regional connectivity requires channeling not just domestic, both public and private resources, but international funds as well, he said. Mark Karpeles, the former high-flying boss of the MTGOX Bitcoin exchange, is appealing against a 2.5-year suspended sentence for data manipulation handed down earlier this month, his lawyer said Friday. On March 15, the Tokyo District Court found a computer whiz from France guilty of tampering with electronic data but acquitted him on charges of embezzling millions from client accounts. The sentence was suspended for 4 years. Prosecutors had additionally claimed that Karpeles had embezzled some 341 million yen of clients' money and splashed it on a lavish lifestyle. They called him for him to serve 10 years behind bars. The European Commission formally put Italy on notice Wednesday for its deteriorating deficit and huge debt, reopening a battle with populist-led Rome. The move, revealed in a statement by the EU's executive arm against Italy's bloated budget, begins a complicated process that, if approved by Eurozone ministers, could result in a fine of more than 3 billion euros. Italy's far-right Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini on Saturday vowed not to yield to the EU, with fears that his fractured government could collapse under the pressure from Brussels. The coalition of the far-right League and anti-establishment Five Stars movement is deeply divided on how to handle the offensive by Brussels, with Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte threatening to resign if the squabbling did not stop. The threat to put Italy into the sin bin comes on the day that the Commission officially proposed to remove Spain from the procedure, with Brussels satisfied that Madrid's public spending was back in order almost a decade after the financial crisis. The Reserve Bank of Australia has cut its benchmark interest rate Tuesday by 0.25 percentage point to a new record low of 1.25% in the first rate change in almost 3 years. Treasurer Josh Frydenberg said in a press conference that the rate cut will be welcome news for Australian households and businesses, and it will mean lower mortgage costs and lower interest payments.
Today, the Reserve Bank of Australia has cut the official rate by 25 basis points to 1.25%. This is the first movement in interest rates since August 2016, almost 3 years ago. In explaining the announcement, the Reserve Bank Governor has said today's decision to lower the cash rate will help make further inroads into the spare capacity in the economy. It will assist with faster progress in reducing unemployment and achieve more assured progress towards the inflation target. Significantly, the Governor went on to say employment growth has been strong and the central scenario remains for the Australian economy to grow by around 2.75% in 2019 and 2020. This rate cut will be welcome news for Australian households and businesses, and it will mean lower mortgage costs and lower interest payments. It is the government's expectation, indeed it is the public's expectation, that banks should pass on in full to consumers the benefits of reduced funding costs as a result of the Reserve Bank's decision.
A group of Japanese women have submitted a petition to the government to protest against what they say is a de facto requirement for female staff to wear high heels at work. The Kutuo campaign, a play on words from the Japanese kutsu, meaning shoes, and kutsu, meaning pain, was launched by the actor and freelance writer Yumi Ishikawa and quickly won support online.
で少しでも社会の空気を変えていって、女性が男性と同じような革靴、フラットの革靴を履いていてもマナー違反ではないという風潮になっていったらいいなと思っております。
That's it for Business News. This is Cesar Vallejos. I'm one with 25 Eagle News International. We'll be back. Stay with us.
Footage emerged on Tuesday of a tornado that hit the Ottawa suburb of Orleans on Sunday. The funnel cloud was filmed from the cockpit of a restored Cold War fighter jet flying near the area. The tornado, which was confirmed by Environment Canada, caused damage to homes and uprooted trees, but no fatalities were reported. City of Ottawa officials said one person sustained minor injuries. Environment Canada teams were analyzing the storm, which experts said was unique in its characteristics.
And a fast-moving wildfire in central Washington state has grown to 7.8 square miles, prompting the Grant County Sheriff's Office to order residents of the town of Smyrna to evacuate. The wildfire is near Wanapum Dam and was spreading quickly in dry grass and sage lands on Tuesday. The Sheriff's Office issued a mandatory evacuation notice to residents in the community of Smyrna on Tuesday morning. The office also told residents of the communities of Beverly, Shawana, and Wanapum Village to be ready to move at a moment's notice. Officials say no homes have been consumed by the fire, but some areas have experienced power outages. Meanwhile, severe thunderstorms have rolled across central and southern Minnesota, bringing winds gusting up to 80 miles per hour or 129 kilometers per hour. Multiple reports of hail and cutting power to more than 4,000 people. Take a look. The storms prompted tornado warnings in the southern Twin Cities and southeastern Minnesota, but no tornadoes were reported as of Tuesday evening. Several people posted pictures of menacing clouds on social media. The National Weather Service says that storms brought winds of 70 to 80 miles per hour across southern Scott County and parts of Dakota and Rice counties. Trees were reported down in North Mankato. 3 power poles were snapped and another fractured near Henderson, which saw wind gusts of up to 85 miles per hour.
I was in my shop when it happened, and I thought there was a train coming through the shop. It looked like the trees were bent over, damn near ready to snap off. I just about blew away, the wind was blowing so hard. When I came out, there was branches everywhere all the way into the field, and it was crazy. I had big trees that were this big, uprooted, tipped over. All the shingles were peeled off my roof.
I saw about this much of the car, so I saw the roof. I was like, how in the heck did he make it that far?
We just had large, about golf ball size hail on occasion. We tried to ride it out until the tornado sirens came, and we all booked it for home.
The storms followed a warm, humid day. The temperature reached 85 degrees Fahrenheit at Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport. Chris Doman said he spoke with the local weather tracker after the storm tore through Union Hill, southwest of Minneapolis. Take a listen.
It was over, and he said he clocked it at 85. And he said he's seen some rotation in the clouds, too, that he called in and reported.
As part of the campaign to beat plastic pollution, a photo exhibition by National Geographic was unveiled by the President of the UN General Assembly, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, together with Oscar, Tony, Emmy, and Grammy recipient Whoopi Goldberg.
Do we need to go through 1 trillion plastic bags a year? Do we? Do we need billions of coffee lids tossed aside after moments of use? I don't think so. We must choose to phase out single-use plastics. I am very proud to say that, as promised to Member States in September, I have made the issue of single-use plastics a key objective of my presidency. On the home front, and together with the Office of the Secretary General and partners such as Culinart, we have now officially removed single-use plastics from UN headquarters. This is wonderful.
We all have to do all that is within our power to end plastic pollution and rejuvenate the oceans if our fight against climate change will be successful. This is important because the repercussions of climate change reverberate around the world. In Africa, for example, it has exacerbated conflicts and terrorism, thereby destroying the livelihood of tens of millions of people.
When I saw the visual of what the ocean looked like, because it's been a while since I put on that kind of bathing suit, you know, it's tight. I just can't do it the way I used to. But when I saw what was happening, I don't know, something happened, and then these 2 guys said, so we decided to do something. And so what they did was they talked to the fishermen where they were and said, listen, how much do you make fishing? Let us pay you instead to clean the ocean where you are. And I thought, oh, wow. What a great, simple, brilliant idea, and I lost my mind. So I thought, 1 person, 2 people can make a huge difference.
A partnership between National Geographic and the Office of the President of the General Assembly, and supported with funding from the government of Monaco, strives to highlight how this simple material reshaped both global industries and everyday life, and how it has become such an important component of life on Earth. At the same time, the exhibit draws attention to the problems in our consumption and production patterns, showcasing how disposable and single-use plastics, some used for mere seconds but lasting for centuries, are overwhelming our planet and jeopardizing the health and well-being of people and of ecosystems around the globe.
Plastics, a key objective of my presidency. On the home front, and together with the Office of the Secretary General and partners such as Culinart, we have now officially removed single-use plastics from UN headquarters. This is wonderful.
Don't forget to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Tumblr. Also check out our boards and Pinterest and pictures on Instagram. I'm Sam Cepeda. Thanks for joining us.
And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles and
We're one with 25.